When you hear the words secret weapon, what comes to mind? Probably massive bombs or maybe futuristic jets. But what if I told you that arguably the most effective secret weapon of the Second World War wasn't about bigger explosions or more speed? What if it was a weapon that could think? Seriously, a weapon that could see its target and decide for itself the perfect moment to act. This isn't science fiction. This was a very real piece of technology that completely changed the course of the war. And its story, well, it's one of the most incredible tales of science, secrecy, and sheer desperation you will ever hear.
I want you to just picture this for a second. It's December 1944. You're a German officer, Hauptmann Klaus Richter, in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge. The snow is thick, the air is freezing. You are a hardened, experienced soldier. You think you've seen it all. But then, something happens that makes no sense. The American artillery starts to fall, but it doesn't hit the ground. The shells are exploding in the air, directly over your men as they huddle in their foxholes. It creates this perfect cone of shrapnel that no one can escape from. There's nowhere to hide. It's as if death itself is just reaching down from the sky. And in his report, Richter wrote that phrase, "Death comes from the sky itself." The psychological terror was just as devastating as the physical toll.
So you can imagine the panic that set in. The big question ripping through the German high command was, what is this thing? How can a simple piece of metal, a dumb artillery shell, possibly know the exact right moment to explode? This wasn't just a new gun or a bigger tank. It felt like the fundamental rules of war had been rewritten overnight. And to really understand the answer, we have to rewind the clock, back to the beginning of the war, to a problem that seemed absolutely, completely unsolvable.
Okay, so Section 1, the problem. This whole story really begins from a place of pure, raw desperation. It's 1940. The Battle of Britain is raging. The country is basically on its own, staring down the most powerful air force in the world, the Luftwaffe. Everything, and I mean everything, depended on being able to shoot down German planes. But the math of that fight, well, it wasn't just grim. It was practically a death sentence.
Look at this number. Just let it sink in. 8,500. During the First World War, that's how many anti-aircraft shells, on average, it took to bring down a single plane. Think about that. You were firing thousands and thousands of shells, just hoping for a 1 in a million lucky hit. And by World War II, the planes were flying faster, higher. The problem was even worse. You were literally just filling the sky with metal and praying. That's not a strategy. That's a recipe for disaster. You can't win a war like that.
So in this moment of crisis, British scientists came up with an idea that was, frankly, genius. They thought, what if the shell itself could have a tiny radio in it? It would send out a signal, and when that signal bounced off a plane and came back, it would trigger the explosion. No need for a direct hit, just get close. It was a potential war winner, absolutely brilliant. There was just one tiny little problem. In 1940, the technology to actually build it was pure science fiction. The delicate little radio tubes, the batteries, they would be instantly pulverized into dust by the insane forces of being fired out of a cannon. The ideal was there, but it was impossible to make.
And that leads us to Section 2, the solution, an American miracle. With their backs against the wall, the British did something truly incredible. They gathered up all of their most advanced, top-secret research, including this impossible idea for a thinking shell, and they put it all in a briefcase and sailed it across the Atlantic to the still neutral United States. What happens next? It's just this incredible story of American science and industry coming together to achieve the impossible.
And the speed at which they worked is just mind-blowing. Look at this timeline. September 1940, the idea arrives in the U.S. By December, a top-secret team, Section T, is up and running. A little over a year later, a brilliant young scientist named James Van Allen, the same Van Allen who would later discover the radiation belts around Earth, he invents a vacuum tube tough enough to survive being shot out of a gun. And then, by August of '42, less than 2 years from getting the idea, they're on the deck of the USS Cleveland, actually shooting drones out of the sky with working prototypes. The pace is just breathtaking.
But let's be really clear. Just because they were fast doesn't mean it was easy. The physics they had to overcome were just absurd. I want you to take your phone out of your pocket. Now imagine trying to design it so that it could survive being launched with 20,000 times the force of gravity. That's not a typo. 20,000 Gs, while also spinning at 30,000 RPMs. Oh, and by the way, you have to shrink an entire radar transmitter and receiver down to the size of a coffee can. And the battery can't turn on until after it's been fired. Every single one of these steps was considered impossible by the best minds in 1940. They had to invent the solutions from scratch.
So how on earth did they do it? Well, this quote from the project's leader, Merle Tuve, tells you everything.
He said, "I don't want any damn fool in this laboratory to save money, I only want him to save time." For these scientists, this wasn't just some interesting academic problem. They felt a deep moral responsibility. Every day they wasted, every corner they cut that led to a delay, meant more Allied sailors and soldiers were going to die. Time was the only currency that mattered. It was a race against death.
And the result of all this frantic work was this: the proximity fuse. You can basically think of it as a tiny, disposable radar station that you pack into the tip of a shell. As it flies, it's sending out radio waves. The second those waves hit something solid, like the metal skin of an airplane, and bounce back, a little circuit inside closes, and boom, it detonates. The beauty of it is that it doesn't need to actually hit the target. It just has to get close. It turned every single shell from a dumb projectile into a smart weapon.
Right, so, Section 3, the impact. Building this thing was one miracle, but actually using it in combat? That's when the proximity fuse went from a top-secret project to a war-winning weapon. We're talking about a device that literally turned the tide in every single theater of the war, from the vast Pacific Ocean to the skies over England and the frozen forests of Belgium.
Just look at these numbers from the naval war in the Pacific. They're stunning. Let's focus on the bottom two rows. The new proximity fuse shells, they made up only a quarter, just 25% of all the anti-aircraft ammo that was fired. But that little 25% was responsible for over half, 51%, of all the Japanese planes shot down by naval guns. That isn't just a little better. That is a game-changing, revolutionary leap in lethality.
But numbers on a chart don't tell you what it felt like. For that, you have to listen to guys like gunner's mate Anthony Pui. He was on the USS Helena when they first used these fuses in combat. And he said, "We were knocking them down with just a few shots. It was like God himself was guiding our shells." Can you imagine? After months, maybe years of just firing endlessly and hoping for a lucky break, suddenly you're a sharpshooter. Every burst seems to find its mark. The change in morale on those ships must have been absolutely electric.
And the story was exactly the same over in Europe. In 1944, Hitler started launching these terrifying V-1 buzz bombs at London. They were basically the world's first cruise missiles, and in the first week, the British defenses could only take down about 24% of them. But then, the proximity fuses showed up. And you can see it right here on the chart. The success rate doubles to 46%, and by the fourth week, once they're fully deployed, it's up to almost 80%. This one device, this one secret weapon almost single-handedly saved London from utter devastation.
Now, for most of the war, this thing was so secret, they were terrified to use it over land. They were worried the Germans would get their hands on a dud and figure out how it worked. But during the absolute desperation of the Battle of the Bulge, the order finally came down: use them. And when General George Patton, a man not exactly known for easy praise, saw what it could do, he called it devastating, magnificent. That tells you everything you need to know.
And this number, this is the reason for Patton's praise: 702. This is the number that comes directly from that opening story about Hauptmann Richter. In one attack, a German unit was caught out in the open. A single American artillery barrage came in using these new shells. When the smoke cleared, a head count found 702 German soldiers killed. The old rules of warfare, dig a trench, get in a foxhole, find cover, they were erased in an instant. The very air had become the enemy.
So let's talk about the legacy. The fuse's impact on winning the war is pretty clear. But what's maybe even more incredible is how this secret project, born out of this desperate race against time, ended up creating the foundation for the technological world that you and I live in right now. Its DNA is everywhere.
First, let's talk about the miracle of mass production. Those very first handmade prototypes in 1942, they cost $732 a pop. In today's money, that's more than $11,000 for a single shell fuse. But by the end of the war, American factories were cranking them out for just $18 each. That is a cost reduction of over 97%. That achievement, turning a delicate, expensive lab instrument into a cheap, disposable commodity, was just as important as inventing it in the first place. It meant you could use them by the millions.
And this is the part that connects directly to us today. The problems they had to solve to build this fuse accidentally became the building blocks of the 21st century. The push to make tiny, rugged electronics, that directly led to the transistor and the microchip. The science of shock hardening, making electronics tough enough to survive a cannon blast, that's the same science that ensures the GPS satellite in orbit, and yes, the smartphone in your hand, can survive the violence of a rocket launch. This was the world's first true smart weapon, the great-grandfather of every guided missile and drone flying today.
And that whole model of the government, universities, and private industry all collaborating on a massive secret project, that became the blueprint for everything from the space race to the internet.
So, when you step back and look at the whole story, the proximity fuse is so much more than just a clever gadget. It's a powerful lesson in what's possible when science and industry are united by a common, urgent purpose. It shows how a free society, when pushed to the absolute brink, can innovate its way out of disaster. It was the very first weapon that could think, and it played a crucial role in winning a war for the future of the world. Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty heavy question for our own time, because the next generation of thinking weapons is already being developed. So the real question is, what will we choose to do with them?